about what happened during the negotiations of the price and the contract. Their original amount was $2.368 million. That was higher than the other proposers. In meeting with them, they also provided much more in the terms of resources and staffing and expertise to finish this multifaceted project. But we certainly wanted to be the best stewards of public funds in coming up with a price that was closer to what we were seeing in the other proposals, and indeed accomplished that. The new recommended contract amount does not exceed $1.75 million, with $250,000 of that in contingency.
What was that amount again?
1.75, $1,750,000, with $250,000 of that in contingency. So that brought us financially more in line with what we saw in the other proposal. And also in a very fruitful and productive conversation with DLR in negotiating that working relationship and managing that budget. There are many factors of the work which did not allow us to have a phase-by-phase amount, which I know is pretty critical in contracts, especially one of this size. However, some of the work in the initial phase helps to direct what will be allocated of that maximum amount for the other phases. And by that, for example, I mean the number of sites will make a difference. And we don't know that ahead of time. Some of the other decisions on site location will make a difference in the subsequent phasing of the amounts, or the amounts in each phase of the contract, I should say. The first phase, we did establish a number of 146,000. So we know that during the decision-making period, when a lot of those unknown variables will become more clear, that will help determine the implementation of the rest of the contract, we have that dollar amount. So that's the not to exceed, that's the aspects of these different phases and why we're not doing a cost per phase. Quite frankly, commissioners, it would be completely random, and I'd be coming back to you to update the contract continually. And we'd be wondering, why are we always updating it? We have the maximum, it will not go over that amount. But the distribution among the 6 stages of this project is better determined after the first stage. That's best said. And each month, we will review the work done to date, the cost, and subsequent budget amount. So we've built in a very strict strategy for contract compliance, oversight, and budget review with those monthly reviews. That's a safety measure in any contract, I think, of this size, but also in one when we're allocating them on as those other factors are decided upon and it's clear the distribution of dollars for the six phases.
And this does not, we do know that we will have some funds from the state for the courthouse portion of the design, and that will defray some of this expense as well.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner, I'll segue into that piece now. So we had asked DLR to give an estimate, let me back up. As you all know, because you all did the work in securing those $2 million from the state to match the courthouse planning. We asked what percent of the 1.75 would go towards the courthouse, in knowing that half of that will be supplied by the dollars you secured from the state. Again, this would be a very random estimate, and rather than projecting something that would be needed to update after this first phase is completed, I provided some template of looking at those dollars to give you an idea of what it might look like. The final amount will be determined through the decision-making process with DLR. So it will not always stay a wonder or a question mark. It's just that you have so many specific questions that need to be answered and decisions that need to be made before we know what percent of the time goes towards that. DLR is setting up a separate tracking system in their accounting, and we will be getting an update on that monthly, so we can keep track of what proportion is for the courthouse. The example, though, is the not to exceed amount is 1.75. If the percent of the courthouse were 10%, then the portion from the state would be $87,500, for example. If it were 30%, the portion from the state would be $262,000. Just to give you an idea of, I really debated in your checklist to put in that kind of an example because it is for illustration only. But I didn't want that piece of the courthouse funding to be lost in a big narrative, so I wanted you to see some financial impact in a cost modeling scenario is what I put together. So those dollars of the 175 not to exceed total will have some offset from the state.
Heather, I know that in here you did do a calculation of the percentage of the potential overall project cost that this would be, and it's somewhere in the range of 2 to 3%. But we also, I know, in discussions with all of the potential contractors at our initial meeting, discussed the fact that this planning phase is really key to the long-term success of the project, and that the engineering costs might not be as, should be much simpler in the final design phase, having done a real thorough job in this phase. Right?
We're doing so much work during this phase in addition to the hard decisions that the county will need to make. And it is also included the design and some of the initial engineering, not the schematic version that's done after. So I want to be clear that it's not all complete. Once the community has the support through it via a bond measure, then you have the schematic design. And that gets down to where the windows are, where the outlets are, some of the very detailed pieces of architectural designing. But you will have a design, conceptual design, and cost at the end of your pre-design work here. So where did I get that 2 and 3%? I wanted to come to you with, well, how reasonable is this? To give you some kind of benchmark. One, I knew it was comparable to the other proposal that we looked at, and those two, but obviously firms put them together in a very separate process. So that's one, face validity. The other is knowing that a certain percentage of overall construction should go to pre-design work. And without having the numbers on the construction now, because that's what pre-design will determine, I had to come up with a proxy measure. And went back to the criminal justice assessment, where CGL had put together some initial estimates and ranges of costs. Those are very preliminary in that assessment piece. They had not done the kind of detailed work that you're going to get in the pre-design. But based on that, I estimated between 2 and 3%. It's a little bit higher than industry for pre-design. However, you have a very complex pre-design project, and so it's not out of range for what the county is asking for by any means.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am ready to propose a motion. Unless
Well,
further questions.
I just had one more comment than a question, but the initial cost estimate, DLR was considerably above the other bids. And as part of the negotiations, DLR came back and said, well, that's not really redesigned, and suggested taking out several components, and which reduced the bid. Is that, do I have that story?
Yes, sir, you do have that correct, Commissioner, and also a really good point to make that I should describe a little bit more, because the negotiations brought it down by substantially. So in the goal of negotiating, when I said we wanted to make sure you're being good stewards of the public's funds, the other is not to lose the quality that they were bringing. And so they had both those benchmarks. And the way they helped in the negotiations was by pointing out that some of the schematic work that was in the pre-design could and actually should be managed in the actual design and construction piece. So we're not losing quality of work. We are budgeting for the totality of the pre-design and moving over what is actually a better fit during the construction period.
Thanks.
And
Thank you.
Commissioners, as we went through the evaluation of both of the bids that we received, each one of the respondents during their presentation to the selection panel were asked the question about the budget for their particular project. And it was really during that phase, that evaluation phase, that each contractor had the ability to say, we can look at changing our proposal by doing X, Y, and Z. And so going into negotiations with DLR, we had that insight from them, as well as that insight from the other contractor that was bidding on CGL. So I think we had an idea as we were going into negotiations about what some of those things are that we could reduce based on the presentations they did during the selection phase.
Anything else?
Just one item, I think that we have used DLR before, and we're a little bit more familiar with that group, and I think the numbers they brought forward were good.
Thank you, Commissioner. You're right, they're bringing a incredible amount of expertise and balance here for this multi-phased and rather complex projects. We had 3 firms saying it was beyond their capabilities and pulled out of actually submitting a proposal. So you got someone who's dialed into all the aspects of what we asked for in a very detailed and thoughtful way.
Okay, I would move to authorize the board chair to sign the contract between DLR and Benton County for the pre-design services for the criminal justice systems improvement project with a not-to-exceed figure of $1,750,000 upon final review and approval of county council and county administrator.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners. Exciting time to bring them on and start this work with them after all the resources and time that's put into getting us here. So thank you very much. And Vance and I are working out our roadshow for contract development for Benton County. Thank you.
Thanks, Ari.